Hello and welcome to the Reverend Hunter Podcast. This is Tony Jones. I'm the Reverend Hunter, and I'm not joined by Brandon. That's the first piece of news here for this 100th episode of the Reverend Hunter Podcast. Brandon has moved on. He's no longer with Talk North Network, which is a bummer. I know I just have heard from so many people over the last couple of years. I mean, I just heard from somebody maybe 2 weeks ago who said, I don't always listen to the full interview, but I always listen to the banter for the first 5 to 10 minutes with you and Brandon. And that won't be happening anymore, which I'm sorry to report. But Brandon and I remain friends. We remain in contact. And, you know, he remains an important person to me. And this podcast would not be what it is were it not for his support. So after 100 episodes, that is the first shout out, the first thank you to my 99 episode sidekick, Brandon Morton. I will miss him. It won't be the same without him, but I wish him all the best going forward with wherever life takes him. So 100 episodes, it's not, I don't know that I expected it to go this long or how I expected it to go. I want to give a couple more thank yous to, but before we get into some other stuff, a huge thank you to Scott Franzen. He is the CEO of Ron Share Productions and Talk North Podcast Network. He brought my podcast in-house from the very beginning. And I think I've said this before, but I think my podcast is the only one on the network that has no sponsors. So it's an act of, altruistic love that Scott has continued to allow my podcast to be on the network, which, basically means he's giving me free use of a producer that is, I'm not bringing in any revenue to cover the time for that producer. And I've felt more and more badly about that over time. It was always, somewhat okay because Brandon really liked doing my podcast and he was a big part of the podcast. His voice was, at the beginning of every episode. So I don't want to say the future of the Reverend Hunter Podcast is uncertain, but Scott Franzen has continued to be super supportive and said, of course, the podcast can stay on the network and everything. But I also don't want to take advantage of Scott's generosity. He's running a business. He's got to compensate his employees for the work that they do, and I don't really feel great about using a couple hours of his producer's time, probably 2 to 4 hours per month of a producer's time when I'm not bringing in any revenue. So a couple things might happen. One, the Reverend Hunter Podcast may take on a little bit different shape. I might just record the episodes myself and just send the content in to Talk North and they simply post it for me. That's one option. I don't feel great about bringing in another producer who's going to be, live recording every episode I do, which is what Brandon did because of, what I've already said. Or, one of you or somebody else could come along and say, I want to sponsor the podcast. And then we'd have some money to pay a producer and stuff like that. So I don't know exactly where we go from here. I do like doing it. It hasn't, the Reverend Hunter Podcast, let's be honest, it's pretty niche-y. There are a lot of hunting podcasts out there that are like tactics about how to hunt better and stuff like that, how to train your dogs better, how to shoot better, how to find white-tailed deer and stuff like that. This podcast is not that. There are a lot of spirituality podcasts that are about how to get more in touch with who you are as a human being and your place in the in the universe. What's your relationship to the divine and things like that. This podcast isn't exactly that. This podcast has been, for the most part, for the last 99 episodes has been conversations with people whom I find interesting, people who have a love of the outdoors and think about their spirituality in regards to their outdoors pursuits. People who, and look, frankly, that hasn't always gone great. I mean, I've had some guests on, if you've listened to some of the past episodes, who we talk a lot about the outdoors, and then when I take the turn to say, how is this for you spiritually? What does this mean for you spiritually? There's kind of crickets. But for the most part, guests have been really forthcoming. I've had a couple, really like high profile TV star hunters on, and they've gotten back to me after the podcast has aired and said that they've heard from their fans who loved it because they talked on my podcast about stuff they've never talked about on their own podcasts. And that's, in part because their podcasts have different aims, and they also are the hosts on the podcast. So they're probably not, opening up about their spiritual pasts and how their spirituality has evolved and things like that. So that's been super gratifying and great to hear, and I'd love to have more conversations like that. Look, there's no dearth of guests. I have a list of at least like a dozen more guests whom I'd like to have on, and that would probably take me through the end of 2024. So I hope to continue to do it. I plan to continue to do it. I would love to hear from those of you who are listening. I don't get a ton of feedback on the podcast because, well, it's just different. I had a book come out a couple months ago, and, there are so many venues to review books. The primary venues are Amazon and Goodreads, and I've got several dozen book reviews on both of those sites, so I can kind of check in every week and see like what are people saying about my book, and how's it landing with people, how does it resonate with readers and stuff like that. It's different podcasts. I mean, you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, but that doesn't really seem to be as much a part of the ecosystem of podcasting in the same way it is with books. I mean, I think obviously the tradition of reviewing books goes way back, and so people are in the kind of, I know people who review every book they read on Goodreads, or at least they give it a rating, and that even my wife Courtney does that to keep track of like which book she's read. I do that. Every book I read, I at least give it a rating on Goodreads. And a lot of people review a lot of books on Amazon. So it's kind of like part of the deal with reading books. It's maybe not so much part of the deal with podcasts. So there are some reviews out there on, Apple Podcasts, but not a ton. So I don't hear a lot from people. I do occasionally bump into people who listen to the podcast and love it and say very nice things, which is great. But all that to say, I really would love to hear from those of you who listen to the podcast. There's no shortage of ways for you to get in touch with me. I read all my. I don't block anybody on DMing me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. So I see all those. You can reach out to me through any venue. My website, Reverend Hunter, has a contact form. People email me through that all the time. So yeah, if you've got thoughts, if you're a loyal listener, send me your thoughts. I would really like to hear them, because sometimes it's a little bit in the podcast world like shouting into the void for me. I mean, it's not for like there are other podcasts on the Talk North Network that regularly do live events like The Flush. I've been on their live podcast a couple times. And some of the other sports podcasts, they do live shows at bars and stuff like that. So that's you when you do a live podcast like that, obviously you're immediately in touch with the fans. You basically just see how many people even show up. Like that gives you a part of it, a part of a sense of, who's listening and what they think about the pod. I don't have those. I don't, I'm a little nervous. I don't think I would do a live podcast because I'd be afraid nobody would show up, which would stink. And, I've done book readings where no one showed up. So I know the feeling. Anyway, that's kind of the state of the podcast. The state of my life. Well, here's the state of my life. A perfect analogy happened this morning. I got up, read the paper, did a little busy work inside the house. And then, as I often do this time of year, July in Minnesota, I went out to my garden, which is a happy place for me. And I harvested a bunch of beets and cucumbers and carrots today. A lot of beans. I still have to go back out after beans, but I harvested all that dirty stuff, and then I went over to the backyard hose to wash it off in the big bucket I had all this stuff in, and as I often do, and then I'm gonna process beets later today, can a bunch of pickled beets, which we will enjoy all winter. And there's a bush that has died right by the backyard hose at our house. So, and I've been meaning to pull it out and put it in the, landscape, the yard waste bin and replace it in the fall. So I started yanking on it and it came out pretty easily, but so did an entire nest of ground wasps. And I got hammered by 5 or 6 ground wasps before I could run away screaming and swearing at these darn wasps. And that's just that's my summer. That's been my summer. Beautiful bounty, like in the garden, followed by pain and suffering. The book came out. It's been really fun. People have been so appreciative of it, and I've never had a book that's received such positive feedback. I've written a lot of books, and people have always, I really like that book or whatever. But the feedback I've gotten on The God of Wild Places is unlike any other book I've written. It's obviously a more personal book. It's a memoir. It's unlike any other book I've written in content, and maybe because it's so personal, I guess that's probably part of it, but I've received just overwhelmingly positive feedback, which has been great. On the other hand, also shitty stuff has happened this summer, and those of you who follow me on social media and stuff know that my 41-year-old cousin died about 2.5 weeks ago. In early July, and just last week I performed her memorial service, officiated it, and it was a very, very intense experience for those 2 weeks, prepping for that, meeting with family members, writing my homily, managing different aspects of the memorial service with different family members. So it was just a lot, and there's been a big gap since episode 99 of the podcast till episode 100, over a month, I think. And that's just because I've been, frankly, overwhelmed with this duty of laying my cousin to rest. She was very close. We were very close. My 2 brothers and I were very close with our girl cousins. They lived down the street from us. Allie was 15 years younger than me. But grew up down the street from me. And so, for many, many years, we were in each other's lives. And then we ended up, we co-own a lake cabin, like with a bunch of family members own a lake cabin in central Minnesota. Allie absolutely loved the lake cabin. And we spent a lot of time up there together. She and I are fellow gardeners. We bought seeds together with my neighbor and podcast listener, Amy, and we would split seeds up, buy a packet. Nobody needs 200 carrots. So we would split up, the seed packets between 2 or 3 of us and share them. So that's been my summer. It's been that combination of some beautiful joy and some real pain, some real hardship. Well, I'm not going to go on and on about without a guest or a co-host or anything like that. But I will say that some people have asked what they can do to help support the book, The God of Wild Places. Obviously, purchasing it, you can do that through my website, godofwildplaces.com. Writing a review on Amazon and or Goodreads is a huge help. And even here's the easiest way to help, honestly. If you go into Amazon and you're logged in to your Amazon account and you find my book and you just clicked helpful under every 5-star review, even that little thing, it's teaching the algorithm that those good reviews are reflective of your experience of the book. So that's probably a 30-second commitment that would really help me with the book. So I appreciate that. I've got some speaking engagements coming up, and if you're interested in having me come and speak, I'd love to do it. I got, for instance, I heard from a couple different churches in Richmond, Virginia. They asked me to come and speak, and I said, hey, how about some hunting while I'm there? Yeah, sure. So it looks like I'm going to do some maybe goose and or duck hunting on the Chesapeake Bay, as well as speaking at a couple churches, which just is such a joyous weekend for me to not only be able to talk about the book and meet people, but get out, do a little hunting. Just fantastic. Couldn't be happier about that. So stuff like that. If you're interested in having me come to one of your places, I'd love to hear from you. Like I said earlier, easy to get in touch with me, 100 different ways to get in touch with me. So the rest of my summer will be spent as much as possible with family. We're still grieving the loss of my cousin, Allie, and we're going to honor her in every way. Be even this week taking her kids to a Twins game and then going up north and probably taking her kids to Paul Bunyan Land while her husband Pat works from the cabin. Do some dog training up there, hang out, drive the kids around on the gator, check the trail cams for deer, do those kind of things. And then got a big family wedding in August out in Bend, Oregon. I'll actually be preaching out there the day after the wedding at Antioch Church in Bend for my good buddy Sean Del Beccaro. And it's just, trying to stay close to family, do everything we can together as we continue to kind of deal with Allie's loss and the hole in our family as a result of her death. But a lot of good things too. The grass is green. We've gotten a ton of rain this year. The Minnesota DNR reports that they've had the most grouse drumming in their survey in June since 1972. So the grouse population looks to be massive, which should lead to a lot of hunting. Early reports from South Dakota are great about the pheasant population. We had a lot of flooding in Minnesota, so that probably hurt the pheasants, but I don't think that happened so much in South Dakota, so that should be good. Yesterday, as I was up at our cabin, coming in back into our place, at the end of our driveway, there was a turkey hen, and she had 7 poults, 7 baby turkeys following her around. So that was great to see. It's just, nature is bountiful these days. And as I look to my left, I see my buddy Crosby, the cover model of the book. He is, in that pose. He's tired from a few days at the cabin. He's lying on a beanbag chair. He's on his back with his all 4 legs just splayed out in the air. Leaving nothing to the imagination, and he's getting his Z's in. So happy dog, happy life. Things are good. Thanks everybody for listening. Hard to believe we've hit 100 episodes of the Reverend Hunter Podcast. I think the future is bright. I've got a few things to sort out about how this podcast is moving forward post Brandon, and as I said repeatedly early, and I'll just say it one more time, I would love to hear from you listeners, what you like, how you think it could change. There are a lot of podcasts out there with, just straight up interviews, one person talking to another. If that's what you like, we can keep doing it. If you think we should change it up, I'm happy to consider lots of options. If you want to sponsor it, if you own a company or an outdoor, somebody in the outdoorsy world who might want to sponsor an episode or sponsor a month or sponsor half a year, I would love to hear from you or from that person. That would be fantastic. As always, as I always say, rate, review, share the Reverend Hunter Podcast if you like it. Thanks for listening to the first 100 episodes. I appreciate your support. And for now, this is Tony Jones, the Reverend Hunter, signing off.